call the September 23rd meeting of Inland Wetlands Commission to order. The first item will be introduction of the commission members.
Pat Fairford, Secretary.
Don Goodrich, Chairman.
Ken Stevens, Vice Chairman.
Peter Smartak, Commissioner.
Lou David, alternate.
Dave McCollum, Inland Wetlands Agent.
Dion.
Oh, Dion Craig, Recording Secretary.
Beth Bagnet, Director of the Plan.
Before we start this meeting, because it's going to be a little bit different, this is kind of the schedule we'll run tonight for the meeting. The first part of the meeting will be the presentation by the applicant, his attorney, and his engineer. That will be followed by questioning and comments from the commission and from the officer. At that time, even though it is not a public hearing, we have decided to allow the public to speak. And when we get to that point, I will explain exactly how we will work that so that we can, maintain some order here. And then Mr. McCollum will have a final statement after that. Okay.
Before we get started, if I can advise, if anyone in the audience wants to follow along with the order of events for the agenda tonight, there are copies of it on the dais which have public participation guidelines on them, which can kind of give you an idea for how to guide your comments to the commission should you decide to step forth in this speech.
Would you like to come together?
Only if
Thank
Pass it back.
Oh, if I get sick tomorrow, you're getting an email.
Our clerk is allergies.
No, it's allergies.
I know my eyes are going crazy. Mr. Marcus, your team.
I'm going to turn it over to the engineer, just to get a full record on Neil Marcus. It's here at your special meeting on the removal of the fill. Hopefully it's all been done timely to everybody's satisfaction, I hope. And I just, at this point, the application is before you, should be winding down because most of the comments have been addressed, and I'd let Mike pick it up because he's going to handle it.
So for the record, Mike Mizuko, professional engineer, my office is in Danbury, representing the applicant. And I did send the email to David copies of the plans that were revised. I just want to submit just 2 full sets of the revised plans.
Thank you very much.
Which has the revision date on the title block. But the only 2 plans that were revised were the ones that are on the screen.
Okay.
All right. And so we, as Neil had mentioned, we did get comments from right peers, we responded. And it's my understanding that they didn't come back with any additional comments, and they were satisfied with the responses that were given. And we had added the cross-section that David had asked for, which is going through. Anyway.
Feel free to use the mouse if you.
Yeah, it's okay. It's just the cross-section that's shown here, I just pointed out, is through this area here. Section A. Which shows retaining walls in the driveway, the elevations on either side. So that was the change there.
Mike, where is that on the plan?
It'll be in the bottom center panel.
Right here, right here.
So the
Okay.
profile is right here.
Okay, good,
And
thank
the
you.
cross-section is here.
That's it, okay, thank you. You've got bigger. Maybe not.
He's trying to look on from a distance. Just figured I'd give him this up to look on, but.
I have
The
two
file.
here.
Oh.
Very good.
Cross-section here, section AA, where it's shown through is up here. So that was the change to that plan, and then the only other thing we did to the site utilities is a question about backing up water onto the adjoining property owner if one of the pipes got clogged and capacity. So we just added another same-size pipe, doubling the capacity of that culvert that we show underneath the driveway. So those are really the 2 changes that we made.
Anything from anyone else? If we are, okay, then I'll open up to the commission to ask any questions or make any comments. Anyone on the commission have any comments or questions concerning this application? David?
Okay. if I may clarify something, Mike, I would just like to say, not that I'm going to speak verbatim for Mr. Ritchie, our consulting engineer from Wright Pierce Engineering Group. There is a continued disagreement with, between you and Mr. Ritchie as to how, if there are components of the stormwater management system that will be running underneath the building, as well as, I think it's the level spreader that's at the base of the retaining wall. If I'm using the correct term, I think that's what that was.
Yes.
I think the design of that, as much as to my knowledge, there hasn't been any revisions made to that. So based on that, Mr. Ritchie doesn't have any additional comments, with consideration that, based on the comments that he provided to you previously, there haven't been any changes made to those, and he's still in disagreement about that.
Well, the only thing I would disagree with it is he had made a comment about the frost protection.
Okay.
So we ended up revising the details just to show that additional frost protection underneath, 42 inches underneath the bottom of the riprap.
Okay.
So that was one of the concerns that he had, but that's how we addressed it.
Okay.
And as far as the pipe under the building, it's, there's pipes under buildings all the time.
Right.
There's heating pipes, there's soil line pipes, there's water main pipes. So it's not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay.
Right.
No, not at this time.
You have a question?
Yeah. I have concern with this retaining wall and what it's gonna do to the adjacent or forward property over there. Your elevation for the top of the retaining wall where it is 516. At the end of the retaining wall, like if you come around like an L, is that 516 or is it higher?
It's roughly 516, because that's the elevation of the parking area. So it doesn't change much.
Okay. All right, and then thank you for adding the second pipe. When it comes out into daylight, going towards the wetland on the property line, how high is it from the base?
At grade.
At grade?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's to prevent it, again, I'm worrying about this pipe. What's to prevent it from getting frozen shut? It happens all the time. If you don't dig them out, it's gonna freeze up.
It's at grade, and the grade is pretty much level across this whole thing. There's no
Right.
way that's gonna freeze up.
Well, what I'm thinking is that grade, let's say.
And the only time pipes freeze up is if there is a constant base flow. And you're gonna find that if you have, say, off of a roof. If you get a warm day, it starts melting,
Right.
it's dripping down, then if you get a cooler weather at night, it'll freeze the pipe. Or if you have, let's say, a footing drain that's draining, your foundation,
Right.
and that line's dripping out at the end, it might freeze up. You'll
Okay,
see that,
so-
whereas a curtain drain, similar situation where you have a small base flow,
Okay.
but not here.
All right, so you need constant flow. Here's what I'm looking at. If I'm reading the elevations correctly, the front property is all sloped to the back of the property. Let's say you get 2 feet of snow in the winter or whatever. 2 feet of snow starts warming up during the day, starts melting. That water's gonna go into the ground and also surface to the back of the property,
Right.
into that pipe. Now you got your constant flow, okay? What if those pipes are under those 2 feet, melting snow going down to the foot, nighttime it freezes? The freezing thawing will not freeze the pipe.
It's not gonna freeze the pipe, because
Okay.
when ice, let's say the snow is melting,
Mhm.
that's a small base flow.
Right.
You've got 10-inch pipes,
Okay,
so
Right.
that's not gonna be an
because
issue.
of the diameter.
It's not gonna be an issue. All right.
Donnie, if I could just jump in real quick, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And this again is to Mr. Mizuko, and I guess it's kind of everybody. We opened this site plan review, or we accepted this on June 24th, and the first meeting that we had, the first 2 meetings that we had on this were July 29th and August 5th. I know, we've already gone through an iteration or two of how these site plans look now. But apart from us five and the applicant's team, I think it would do everyone well to kind of just give a refresher of what's being proposed and where on the site. If Mr. Mizuko wouldn't mind just giving us a brief walkthrough of what the components of this project are, just so everyone has an understanding, I think it would be greatly appreciated.
I think I'll just stay on this plan here because it says the site, pretty much the site and site utilities.
Sure.
So it's a multi-family, single building, L-shaped. There's 11 two-bedroom units. The site's served by sewer. The applicant is bringing in the water line from Taylor Avenue. They'll bring it up just past the site. They'll run a water main in to service the building. There's a stormwater management system and a drainage system, so we're picking up flows, off-site here in this area, as well as the center portion of the property that's owned by the
that's me.
property owner. So there's drainage there that we just talked about, and you've got some drainage on the, sort of on the north side, or western side. And that drains into an inlet here, and it drains into a system, that's the pipe that we just talked about going underneath the building. We have retaining walls to elevate the site, to be able to get the stormwater management system in, which is here. And there's another set of galleries at the near the entrance. And all that is draining to this area here, because it pretty much all drains down towards the north. And we have a level spreader, which there was some question earlier about that, in that location. And then parking's pretty much all in front of the building.
Can you review what areas, based on what is on that plan, what areas this commission is going to be considering for the purposes of this application?
So
Like
there's
100-foot.
there's a regulated area around this wetland system, which is basically the discharge point of that drainage that comes off of Goodhill Road.
Okay.
And then you've got another off-site pond that's on the St. Mary's property. So we took 100 feet from that. And then I think it's about 0.35 acres in total of regulated area between those two.
Okay. And then just so that there's an understanding of what activities are taking place within both of those regulated upland areas, you have the placement of fill to establish the driveway and the retaining walls.
Correct.
And you also have a portion of that 11-unit building that falls within the...
Yeah, a very small portion.
Right, on the western regulated upland area, if I have my bearings correct. And then a portion of the underground stormwater management system and its components
And utilities.
and utilities. Anything else?
I mean, you got stormwater, utilities, driveway, retaining walls, partial building, grading,
Okay.
fill.
I know, I thank you for rehashing this. I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page as to what we're going to be discussing tonight. And so those two areas and the activities that are within them are going to be the basis of what discussions will be from the...
One quick question, the drainage for the paved parking area, as the storms drains for that, where are they located? And where will they empty into the pipe that goes into the wetland?
Correct. It's, all of the roof and driveway will run into, most of it will run into this larger stormwater management system that's located under the parking area. There's another small one here that's picking up a section of the driveway that pitches towards Goodhill Road. So the main one will pick up the buildings, parking areas, and I would say most of the driveway. And that'll all drain into that level spreader, as well as the off-site stuff here and the two pipes that we talked about earlier.
And the storm drains, are there any kind of oil separator or anything built into those?
No.
No.
9, 10, and 11 on the bottom square there. Runoff water is going from where to where?
From the building?
Off the building, yeah. Is that the line that's going?
Yeah, there's roof drains here, there's roof drains here, and then there's roof drains here. We just put multiple lines in typically.
They're all going to the same spot?
Yes, they're all going into this detention system.
So, okay, one of the things I look at when looking at a permit is how it affects the neighbors with the water. How, you know, the runoff is constant. I can't remember a permit where the water hasn't been equal running off in the same spots and all that. Obviously, I have a concern with this wall, because I'm just seeing this dam of, like, happening here for this, you know, we're shifting how all the water goes. It's a smooth flow right now off the whole back of the property, focusing onto one spot. And thank you for putting the second pipe in there. Focusing on that one spot. So I was, you know, you can tell I'm having a concern with this section. Okay. Tell me why I shouldn't be concerned with this section.
Well, I think I've mentioned a number of reasons why you should. But if you're talking about specifically the flow off the neighbor's property, I mean, right now, it's sort of spread out with the contours.
Right.
But obviously, when you put up, say, a barrier, in this case, the driveway, you have to pick up the water. So it comes off the site, comes onto our property, it gets directed to by the wall or grading, it gets directed to the inlet. And then we bring it across here. One of the reasons why the level spreader was we're trying to mimic that, because this is sort of a broad, flat area here, and all of this kind of sheet flows down. So we're just trying to mimic that as much as we can, as best we can, so we're not having, you know, say, one point discharge. We didn't tie all this drainage into one spot and then dump it out in a point discharge. So we're trying to replicate the existing conditions. And the other thing too is, you know, the new stormwater guidelines, the ones that you will try to enforce, 2004 stormwater manual, is you're basically holding an inch of rainfall before you outlet any water.
Right.
So under this design, you're technically getting less water. I mean, I know you say it doesn't, it's never the same, it's always more, but it's, in this case here, you're gonna have a chance for that water, say a 1-inch storm event, to get into the system without any discharge and have it.
But are you holding more water because you're making more, what's the word, impervious soil?
Well, you are, and that's where the rest of the storage comes into play. But you still have an outlet control device to limit your flow, and that's why there's so much storage here.
So basically, you really are, the same amount of water is going off the property, it's just spread out over a longer period of time.
Right.
Because it's being held in that.
With the caveat that, as I just mentioned, with the water quality volume, you have to hold that before you can release any flows.
Right.
So, as I said, on the smaller storm events, you're not gonna see any water coming out of that pipe.
Because it'll be held in
It'll
eventually.
be held.
Anything else?
I don't have any additional comments.
I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me on that one. That pipe's not in the stormwater, it's direct out, right?
Yeah, this is, yeah,
Yes.
anything that was basically off-site,
Right,
we would
goes
just kind
directly
of pass it through. Anything that was impervious and would be put into stormwater system.
Thank you.
Commission members, anything else? Okay. Then we will now open this up to the public. And the manner in which we will do this is, if anyone has a question or a comment to make concerning this, raise your hand, you'll be called upon. We ask that you come up front and either sit in the chair or stand, give your name and address, and address your comments or questions to the commission. At no time shall there be any kind of ongoing conversation between the public and the commission or the public and the applicant. Questions and comments will be dealt after the first round of comments that are made. Okay? Yes.
I'm Kristen Duran. I live at 12 Goodhill, for the record. Sure. Last name is G as in Gary, and then Iron, I-R-O-N, as in Nancy. On behalf of Goodhill, I'd like to request of the commission to ask the applicant for a 30-day extension to continue reviewing the site plan. The residents of Goodhill have hired a soil scientist, Stephen Danzer, who was unable to come tonight. He has been out to the site, the wetlands area on the Conti property, in addition to the St. Mary's property. And he has concerns. And we would like to have him come to the October 28th meeting as he is pulling together a report of such findings. But he wasn't able to have that prepared for this evening. So we would like an extension in order for him to come and express such findings and discuss it with the commission.
You have a letter from him requesting?
I do. I have a letter from him for you.
If you-
Can I confirm?
Okay.
I have a couple of copies if you'd like them.
Most importantly, get me to get the secretary.
I'll take a copy.
I'll take a copy.
Would anyone else like a copy?
Would anyone else like a copy of the letter? We can just hold it.
See one.
Okay.
Each one also.
I'll give it here.
That's right. I'm not sure the applicant had a copy.
All right, any other, we will address that shortly.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Hello, Ryan Cornish. I live at 21 Goodhill,
Can you spell your last name?
Cornish. With the preliminary reports that we've seen from the soil scientist, this plan is essentially defective on its face due to an inaccurate map of the lot and the wetlands to the west of the lot. The township and the builder, at the last meeting, we discussed that they did soil testing on the lot to the north, the Conti property, number 7. No soil samples or anything were done on the property to the west, the St. Mary's property. The wetlands on St. Mary's property not being tested, our soil scientists found an inaccuracy with essentially the border of the wetlands. I think that the committee should stop everything essentially where it is now until an appropriate border is found and the soil sample and the scientific findings have been essentially evaluated. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what is criminal or not. I've never looked into these things. I'm completely woefully ignorant in most of these things. Never provided false information knowingly or unknowingly to a committee. I'm not attempting to accuse or impugn anyone in the room, but they've used a map that's essentially inaccurate in the site plan, and the committee should look into this. Everything regarding the site to the west has not been essentially evaluated appropriately in our estimation and our scientists' estimation. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that has a question or a comment? Okay. I will address the letter a little bit momentarily, but I'd like first to address your comments. And Mr. Marcus, I think you should really address those comments as far as the soil samples and the incorrect site map. What is your response to that?
Well, it's a pretty tough allegation against our soil scientist. But I will tell you that having been on a lot of sites in the last 40 years, trying to figure out whether they are properly flagged, that 2 qualified soil scientists can stick their auger into the ground, pick it up, take their little chart for coloring, and spend 10 minutes arguing about what the variations are. It is not exactly, it's not an exact science which you measure with real tools. So I will tell you that soil scientists can disagree on where the actual soil changes. I mean, basically, they go out and they dig there and they look and then they dig over here and then they decide, well, somewhere in between here is the line. It's not exact. So the suggestion that further work needs to be done to the west, which is the St. Mary's property, first of all, there's no indication that St. Mary's has consented to any of this work on the property, so that's a bit of a problem for Dr. Danzer, actually. And I'm not sure that it's gonna add a tremendous amount because we are dealing only with work that's within the 100-foot upland review area. So quite honestly, if the line's off by 10 feet or 15 feet, at the end of the day, it's not gonna have a significant impact on the issues that you have to deal with here. Remember, this is an affordable housing application, and the real question is, are there no accommodations that could reasonably be made to address health and safety issues? So if you find that, and by the way, we're gonna probably close this matter this evening, because quite honestly, Dr. Danzer's letter is a little bit scant in terms of suggesting what he intends to do and what his timetable is to do it. And unfortunately, I've had experience with Dr. Danzer over the years, and quite honestly, I'm not sure that he's going to do what you need to evaluate the site. Your consultants have already been out there, and quite honestly, from what Mike has presented this evening, we've addressed their concerns. But the fact of the matter is, just assume for a second that they determine that the wetlands line on St. Mary's is closer to the property. We're still beyond we're still, only within the upland review area. Unless they're suggesting that somehow there are wetlands on the site, and there's no reason to think that. I mean, you guys have been out there, and in reality, there's visually no reason to think that the wetlands are on the site itself. So the question really is, what benefit is there to doing this study? However, the good news is that after this hearing is closed, if Dr. Danzer wants to go out and redo the wetlands, he can bring those issues to the Planning and Zoning Commission, because they're the ones who will determine whether the site is a threat to public health and safety. The issue is that you need to determine whether this development, as proposed, is going to have any likely impacts on the wetlands. Quite honestly, your question, as I was listening to it, was a good question. Fabulous, belongs to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Your question was, well, I'm worried about the sheet flow out here. And that's not the wetlands. As I say, I don't suggest that it's not appropriate. It's not what we're concerned with at this commission. Our question is, how does it affect wetlands out here, which was shown on the map, and how would it affect the wetlands if they were 10 feet off? But the fact of the matter is that this seems to be a pretense to go after, to try to raise concerns which aren't legitimate based on just a common sense approach. You go out there and you say, this isn't a 30-acre site with pristine swamps that we're worried about in a natural habitat for endangered species. This is a developed residential neighborhood, and this is a building lot. I mean, with all due respect, I think that we want to design it so it doesn't have any impacts negatively on the wetlands. And you've heard Mike's presentation. We're talking about basically no disturbance to the wetlands, and we're doing a hydrological balance, which basically we used to call it zero net increase in runoff during the storm events. He's explained it very well as to how they retain the water and discharge it, so the natural pre-development conditions will occur post-development. So with respect to the last minute request, I don't think that it's warranted here. However, if Dr. Danzer goes out and finds that there are other wetlands that need to be addressed, that is something that can be brought back to the attention of the commission in a different format. But at this point, there's not enough in this. I mean, this is just a request. Well, let's have another 30 days. And Mike will now tell you the real reason why it doesn't apply.
Well, I think this is an important reason, is that all of the flow all of the flow that's on the site flows in the northeast direction, so it doesn't even flow over towards the St. Mary's property. There's a watershed boundary at the stone wall, and then, like I said, this all drains that way.
And what's on the other side up there? Is there a wetland up there, Mike?
Where? Oh, you have this wetland here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
but-
kind of like draining that way, isn't it?
Well, this, yeah, all of this is drained for now. We're not changing that. That's why we had to put this inlet over here.
But it's draining into a wetland.
It is, but this, what I'm saying is, we're not impacting the
The
one that's
pond.
being questioned, the pond.
Oh, okay.
That was my only point.
Okay.
Well, my first comment is that, and this is my response to you, Mr. Marcus, our responsibility is not just to the wetlands, it is also to the 100-foot upland review area.
Right.
So we do need to look at what is happening, not just to the wetlands, but what could be happening to the upland review, which leads into the wetlands.
Right.
As far as having another expert, I don't think you can give an opinion about another scientist's capabilities of doing something. We, as a commission, have a responsibility to listen to both an applicant and to the public. And the public has presented a concern and has hired another scientist, which is in great disagreement with your scientist.
We don't know that.
We don't know that yet.
But
We don't know.
Okay, but we need to hear what he has to say before we can make that decision.
To confirm whether or not there are any disagreements.
We believe, the commission believes that we need to hear what that soil scientist has to say before we can say, well, you're really basically in the same place. Oh, there is a big difference. We don't know that until we hear what he has to say. So, I mean.
That's a problem, because at this point, he's a dollar short and an hour late.
But the letter was presented to us, we've accepted the letter. They do have a soil scientist who wish to present information, and we do need to do that, and we do need to do it within the time of this application. And that is why they have requested the 30-day extension. David,
Okay.
you had something you wanted to say? Finish it up.
Thank you. Just, my comments are going to be brief, in that whether or not this application has any association with 8-30G is irrelevant for the purposes of this commission. So the concerns for health, safety, and welfare, while they may be of concern with planning and zoning, I don't think they should be focused on that, and neither should anyone else here in this room. The second thing I would want to say is that the commission should have an accurate and agreed on determination as to how much activity is taking place within the regulated upland review area. It should be on the record, because that's going to be one of the components for the consideration for their decision. And if there's a discretion or a discrepancy that's found by Mr. Danzer in saying, okay, if there's actually more wetlands on the St. Mary's Cemetery property than was originally found to be, the commission should know that. Whether or not that's actually found in Mr. Danzer's report is going to be determined, but they should be given an opportunity to review that before a decision is made. My last comment would be in reference to what Mr. Kerfoot said, and I think we have to make a distinction between a direct impact to a wetland and an indirect impact to a wetland, and that is Mr. Kerfoot's concerns are about what happens if water gets clogged behind an outlet and then suddenly perhaps gets discharged in the direction of that wetland. I think his concerns were to make sure that the way the system is designed is that it can, if that flaw presents itself, that the system can still function and not create a condition where it adversely impacts the wetland. I think that's an indirect impact. Am I paraphrasing what you were saying correctly?
Yes.
So I think that's just some clarification that the commission wants, and I think it needs before it makes a decision. And
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
In receiving this first application, it seems like a relatively simple application. Mr. Draper and his people have presented what appears to be a proper application. And we have heard your information from the engineer, from a lawyer, from a soil scientist. We want to treat you fairly. However, I do believe since another soil scientist has been brought into the mixture, that we owe the public the time to listen to what the soil scientist has, so we can make an honest decision. I think we can only make an honest and clear decision once we hear that soil scientist. It may turn out the same way, but we need to hear from that other soil scientist. And in order to do that, and to still be able to complete this application within time, we need a 30-day extension.
Thank you.
I just
Yeah.
I think what the commission is asking for an accommodation by asking for the extension. I know that I know that you're on a time crunch, and I know what that's like. We all know what that's like. We've been there, done it enough. I think that some accommodations can be made for, and one being, I think, Neil, that in, I believe an email you sent, you know, the soil scientist should submit something within the next 2 weeks to give your soil scientist time to review the materials that are being submitted, and I think that's fair. I think that the commission should consider doing some type of a special meeting or a special presentation, a special meeting, obviously, in order to hear from the soil scientist, in order to hear from your soil scientist, if there's disagreement between the two. I think it's irrelevant for us to be discussing if there's more wetlands in the St. Mary's Pond area versus down the road or whatever. We can't have those type of discussions until you hear from the soil scientist. So I think that's very irrelevant at this point. But I think that it's not much for the commission to ask you to accommodate to receive this information and make their decision.
Here's what the 30 days would do. Give you an extension.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry,
just
I'm
finish.
sorry.
That way, by their meeting at the end of October, you've heard whatever you're supposed to hear, and then you're able to come to some kind of conclusion and make a decision on the application. I mean, I think that's a way we could accommodate this.
You know, Beth, if I hadn't had experience with a soil scientist.
I've never
I might
met him
have
in
a
my
different
life. I don't know
different
who he is.
text.
That's
However,
irrelevant.
it is relevant, because between you and me, I do this a lot. And if I'm gonna come to a commission and ask for a continuation, and I'm not the applicant, I would have a little bit of a description of why. This is not a description of why. Read what he says, a preliminary analysis. Well, what is that? Was he, I mean, where was he? When was he on the site? I would say, I was on the site and I spent 2 hours on this date. I dug some tests around me. I mean, what's the preliminary analysis? That's the first thing. The second thing is, he says, has revealed several wetland-related concerns. Well, why don't you tell us what those are? Those are great phrases. I got the concerns, you know. Yeah, the doctor, I got concerns about my health. What are they? I don't know. Yeah, I got concerns. So that, including but not limited to the lack of a certified wetland boundary. Well, that's just downright false. I will tell you, which is not unusual in my reports from Dr. Danzer, where he will sometimes go to sources that don't exist. So I got a little problem with this statement that these are for. I'm not the wetland scientist. I know the gentleman we work with. You've used his work extensively in this town. But for this letter to say that these are not certified, he's just saying that the work that this guy did is uncertified. He didn't say might be in question. He didn't say would be subject to some sort of negotiation. We'll get to you, David.
Okay.
I'm just saying that this is the worst request I've ever seen for this type of extension. And I'm a little outraged only because I've been down the road with this consultant before, and I've seen the work that he has done. So I hate to bring up old gripes, but if there were a reason here, he looks forward to submitting and presenting his findings. Well, that's great. I mean, so then we can sort of start all over again, because in October, if we get his findings, and of course our sort of sign, and of course we go back to Wright Pierce, and we can just start all over again in October. That's my
We're not
problem.
going back to Wright Pierce. Wright Pierce has done this.
Well, yeah, based on this data, but between you and me,
But what is a soil scientist, and what expertise does he have to be discussing engineering principles?
Right, but I think the important thing is that
why does this go to them
This-
for soil science?
this development has no impact on that because of the watershed. And I think that's, everybody's missing a big point there. But
That's the problem. So the answer is the applicant is unwilling to do this. So it doesn't really matter what my personal feelings are, but I will tell you that I understand why. That's why I asked this afternoon, quite honestly, we had this communication this afternoon. And this is not a compelling reason for you guys to have a special meeting, actually. It's not there.
1 second, Mr. Marcus. I'm having one bit of difficulty here. And I am hearing you say that you're taking this one individual soil scientist and saying it's no good because it's coming from the site. Don't answer me.
No, the answer
Okay.
is, this isn't good for any soil
Okay,
scientist.
but the soil scientist wants to present his information, and we as a commission don't feel comfortable making a decision until we hear his information. We are not trying to put this off again and again and again. We want to get it finalized. But we do not feel comfortable making a decision until we hear the information from the other soil scientist. We're not saying that your soil scientist is wrong or incorrect, or doesn't have, professional qualities. These are two different soil scientists with two different opinions, and as a commission, we feel we need to hear from both scientists and then make our decision.
But I'll tell you, any soil scientist that uses the phrase that these plans lack a certified wetland boundary is just wrong. I don't care who it is. But it's not unusual, because I've seen it work.
Well, let's leave that out of it.
So, let's go back to, because I am holding the report from Davison Environmental in my hands,
Yes.
dated August, the date of the work is, said here, August 8th, 2018. If it were mentioned in this report that there would be no adverse impacts to either the pond or to the wetlands that he flagged on the property to the north, it would be in here.
That's not correct.
That's not correct.
Because he hasn't even seen the site development plan, so how would he know if there's any impact or not?
The issue is, did he depict the soils correctly?
Attached is a sketch map showing the areas delineated. This map is, and I quote, attached is a sketch map showing the areas delineated. This map is intended for surveying purposes only. The location and extent of wetlands is approximate.
That's correct. That's what they are. They're an approximate.
So why can't we have
Somebody else
some
talks about it?
an embellishment of that fact from an additional soil scientist that perhaps can reinforce what Mr. Davison has already said? Because if anything, that would work in the applicant's favor. But the commission can't be certain that that exists without having that information from him.
But I think what we're saying is that we want to be fair to both sides. The applicant has presented plenty of information. The public has now come forth with new information which we believe we need to hear in order to make a fair decision.
But the problem is you say, the applicant's been doing this for 4 months, or 5 months, and, or 4 months. And the public doesn't get a better shot at it, because that's why we have the regulations on timing. It's to avoid exactly what's happening here. As I say, you're fundamental, because I am not envious of your position, because you're saying, well, what's this guy going to say? But the real question is, you gotta use your common sense on that. When you go look at the site we're talking about, as I say, given another site, given a larger wetlands area that could be impacted by a more major development, then maybe I'd see your quandary a little bit better. But I think you've gotta put this in perspective with what we're talking about. We have less than an acre-and-a-half development with no indication that even the wetlands line on the west is different. That, as Mike said, that the waters don't flow that direction. I just don't understand why. It's like somebody has held up a carrot here to get you to grab at it, and you're not looking at what he's even saying. And he's good at what he said. He is telling you exactly what he did, which is basically not much.
Mr. Marcus, we're still working within the statutory timeframe that's been allotted by our regs, in that we have a normal 65-day period to hear the site plan review, and then we have 65 days of the extension time.
And where are we?
So we have only used 35 of those 65 days. We still have 30 days left of extension period.
Only if the applicant wants to.
And that's what we're asking
the
for.
project.
Right.
Well, that's up to the applicant.
Right,
So we'll
but,
make a
but,
decision.
but I don't, but
When
we're
is,
not.
when is the, excuse me for interrupting for me.
Okay,
So if they don't grant you the extension, what is the drop dead date?
October 2nd.
Well, why don't we get something from Dr. Danzer by October 2nd and make that decision?
Because we need to hear it.
Well,
We want to hear his presentation.
October 2nd.
They're not gonna make a decision that night, Neil, you know that.
Well, then we can decide whether it should be an extension. Let's hear it on October 2nd.
When is October second?
So next
October
week,
That's your
2nd
drop
falls on a
dead date.
Wednesday.
that's next week, next Wednesday.
This is not a big job to do, quite honestly. It's a small site. That's,
But if we hear him on October 2nd, we're still going to need an extension to make a decision,
Extension for
because
you
we
to-
cannot make a decision
we
that
can
night.
make that
Wait.
decision on October 2nd,
Wait.
quite honestly.
I think the game
We
plan
can.
that I had,
We can make that.
I think the game plan we had was better for you. That you, whatever he's putting in writing or whatever he's gonna do, that I think that he gets the drop dead date of submitting it to you 2 weeks before the end of the month. You know, we do a meeting in the middle of October or the first, you know, sometime in October. Eric has time to review whatever this man is gonna say. I mean, is he just, I don't know if he's just flagging wetlands, is he doing a feature and value report or anything?
I have
I
no
don't
idea.
know what he's doing,
I have no idea.
you know, so I see your point of view, Neil. But again, I'm going back to the accommodation. The commission's asking you to accommodate this, and if you choose not to, and you're gonna say no, please put it in writing and leave it with them this evening. So that way I can discuss it with council, because I've never seen, I've been doing this for not 40 years, probably close to 30, but I've
Even
never
this I haven't
seen
seen
an
often.
extension. I haven't seen you like that, I'd be very honest,
Oh, no.
but I have
Usually very
never,
accommodating.
ever,
Yes, you
I've
are.
never seen an extension not be granted. Here,
But I just.
I've never
this
seen
is-
one
last week.
Yeah, this is outrageous that it comes at the last minute and doesn't say anything. That's the problem. Is to say, if I were going to do this,
yeah.
I would give you a bunch of real good reasons to have, pressure the applicant to give an extension. But there are no reasons at all, in reality, except for we'd like you to think that maybe you're making a mistake.
No, we're giving you a reason. We want to hear what that soil scientist has to say.
Well, as I say.
If he comes in on October 2nd, your soil scientist does not have time to make,
That's correct, but on October 2nd, we can decide whether the thing should be continued, because there's a legitimate issue. That's what I'm saying. Right now, there's no legitimate issue. It's just a delay. And it's
Oh, I
an
don't
imposition,
know.
and by the way, it's an imposition on you. I'm as offended that this is happening to you as to the applicant. Not right. Not the way we do it. Both sides.
But it's not a last minute thing on our part. Like I keep
No,
telling you.
no, it's an imposition on you.
It may be an imposition to a degree, but what we're trying to do is accommodate all parties. That's what we're trying to do.
We have, the applicant has no interest in taking extension.
All right, can we have a
That's the final
recess? Okay. Mr. Chairman, can we have a 5-minute recess?
Try to accommodate the interests that are conflicting at this point. And I went back and again, I met and talked with Mike Duco. There's not much to analyze in the request because it's pretty thin. But to the extent that the focus area proposed by Dr. Danzer, and assuming that he is being honest and is sincere in his issues, we can figure out absolutely no reason why the commission, given the hydrology of the site, would actually have any concerns about the lines drawn on St. Mary's property for the wetland boundary. Because from an environmental perspective or a hydrological perspective, there is nothing that's going to occur on the applicant's site that's going to impact the wetlands on the St. Mary's property. And of course, that's the whole focal point of continuing this. Unfortunately, we're not in a position to request an extension. The applicant, as I say, for all the reasons particularly outlined by our engineer, feels that it's doable for improper reasons. He will not extend the time voluntarily. You heard some of my personal concerns about the drafting of the request, and I still am a little bit miffed that one soil scientist can act subtly another soil scientist's work. That still bothers me, without giving any real justification. So at this point, it's tough on the commission, it's tough on the applicants, and it may be tough on the neighbors, but we're gonna have to finish the application in accordance with the statutory time period. And of course, the commission does have the option, they don't have to decide this tonight. They can call a special meeting between now and next week. They could go back and tell Dr. Danzer to submit to them before that special meeting, and we'll deal with those issues at that point if the occasion arises. I'm not in favor of that particular plan, but I think that, honestly speaking, if this commission were to decide based on the information that's before it this evening, there would be no reason not to grant the application based on the information and review from your consultants. If it turns out that somebody comes along and says that this application is in fact false, that it's false information, then your decision, if you were to approve this, would never be upheld by a court. So if there's something that Dr. Danzer can come along and say that I can show you how this is actually a false application, which is what he's suggesting here, that the application has revealed the concerns, the lack of a certified plan. If that's in fact true, then the decision that you will make would be subject to a further review on the basis of the information submitted, the quality. But I don't believe that's the case. I know that the engineering has already passed review by your consultant. And at this point, to question the integrity of the soil scientist is just not a reason to extend the application. I think you rely on these professionals, and if one professional wants to attack another professional, this is not the place to do it. There's a better place. So I think that that's the decision.
So let's get a consensus from the committee here. We have until October 22nd, or October 2nd, excuse me, without the applicant granting us an extension, for us to make a decision. Our next, October 2nd falls on a Wednesday. Do we have, just to get a show of hands here, do we have a consensus that we could have a special meeting on September 30th, that is next Monday, for us to perhaps receive Mr. Danzer's report or findings, have a special meeting just for this application that night?
I'll be out of town next week.
Okay?
On September 30th?
Yes.
I'm here all day.
Okay?
Are you gonna be in contact with him to let him know we have to?
I will
have
do
all
that
set?
as soon as I get out of this meeting.
I'm in.
Yeah, well, I'm in.
Okay, so I have 3. Okay. 3 is a quorum, so
I will be here.
4th is, okay.
I do
No.
have a question though.
Yes.
Will we have more information presented is it possible to have more information presented?
Well,
That's what it's
that's going to be a question for Mr. Dancer. If you can compare a report in time for that special meeting, I will let you know. But without, having him, informed him of that we are going to be having a special meeting on September 30th, I can't say for sure. But that's when we would have a special meeting for this. I will reach out to him after this meeting is done to ask him if he would be available to either give testimony in person and/or to have a report ready for the commission's review that night, or some kind of document to that effect.
Well, I think that's what basically the commission was asking for, is to be able to hear what he has to say. I hope the public understands that we are trying to accommodate both sides. We need to hear from your person, but it has to be done before October 2nd. So Dave will contact your soil scientist and hopefully get him in next Thursday so we can hear what he has to say. We really need to hear, no matter what anybody says about this man, he's another scientist, and the commission owes it to the public to hear that side. We're not saying there's anything wrong with what your soil scientist has said, but as a commission, we feel we need to hear both sides. And we'll try to do it within that 35 days, which would be on the 30th.
Do I have a motion that we will schedule a special meeting on September 30th?
So moved, 7 o'clock.
Second.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so moved, and we'll have that meeting on the 30th.
Okay.
That's a
Can I,
week from
can I
today.
just say something, Neil? I think there was a little, as far as Eric Davidson and his work as a soil scientist, there was an inference that maybe the commission didn't have good ratings or good feelings about his work in the past. And on behalf of the commission, just because of previous experiences I had as an inland wetlands agent, I'm familiar with Eric, and these guys are familiar with Eric too. And they're not questioning his credibility or anything pertaining to the
No, I
services
agree.
that he provides.
Yeah,
I just want to make that
that's
clear.
That's what I tried
That's
to
why I
say.
get a little bit.
You got a little hot,
passionate.
and I thought that, you were making some inferences that I just wanted to make sure, for the record.
You're
No, don't raise it again.
Yeah, don't raise it. Thank you.
Do we have any other discussions that we need to have on this tonight?
Not with this, no. I think we're done with this. Again, you are welcome to come next Monday. The only speaking will be done by the soil scientist, and then the commission will discuss it and make a decision. But you're welcome to come and listen.
And just so everybody's clear, the meeting will start at our normal time, 7 o'clock?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Tim and Neil and public, thank you also.
Thank you, gentlemen.